Hello everyone. First things first, if you are new to the channel, welcome. And if you're a long-term subscriber, also welcome. I just want to talk in generic terms here. A lot of my videos, I have a specific issue to talk about, and I'll be reading out an op-ed or a news report. Some of my videos I also cover other things. I do film reviews and so on. So, although the overriding theme of this channel is geopolitics, socio-geopolitics, I do sometimes cover other areas as well. Um, I just thought this one would be kind of relevant because maybe some other subscribers out there, some other viewers can relate to this. And if you do, please do say so in the comments section. I think that in 2025 it's quite difficult to be a centrist. And I felt this way for a while, and yet I don't regret that is how I position myself. Here's the thing: if you are in any way political, if you have strong views on socio-political issues, and it may actually be the case that more people are getting involved in politics, rightly or wrongly, due to the environment that we're in. When I say getting involved in politics, I don't mean necessarily political activists, just being motivated, having strong views on things. But we also live in an era of disinformation, and we live in an era where I think that people feel they need to be in one camp or another. It's almost like, politicians in a way need to. There's the party whipping system. They kind of need to go with the party and they defend the party, because it's a sense of loyalty, but also because that's the way party politics works. A politician or a candidate on the doorstep is going to try and convince a voter to vote for their party. They're not, and they may or may not listen to the concerns, but there's always going to be a pitch there. That's the point. And I'm not criticizing that; it's normal. But with those of us who aren't party activists or candidates or members of political parties, what we have is information, and we form our views based on what we see. Hopefully, people would be objective, but it's not always easy to be objective. Sometimes, particularly with emotive subjects, it can be very difficult to sort of rise above it and just think in a very clinical, objective way, because there are areas that really do have implications on people's lives. So, for example, the subject that I'm sensitive on is crime and justice, partly because I've had experience of that, but also just it's not something that I am neutral on. As a centrist, that I think there's this perception, and I keep raising this point whenever I talk about my centrism. People just assume it means agreeing with everyone or sitting on the fence with every subject. And I've even had some nuggets such as, oh, you're not really a centrist, you're a right-winger, or you're a left-winger. And I've had it from both sides. And I think people jump to those conclusions, or they want to present me that way because they've perhaps come across a video that they don't like and they don't agree with me on. And that's fine, but just disagree with me. But don't say that I'm not a centrist just because you don't like my view on a particular issue. It's true that I would veer more to the right or more to the left on a given subject, but what I always say with this is I call myself a centrist because overall that's where I gravitate to. It's not like where I lean conservative, for example, on the issue of crime, I lean conservative on everything. It's not like where I lean to the left, perhaps on welfare issues or maybe some other areas, that I'm left-wing on everything, because I'm not. So how does someone who has both left-wing and right-wing leanings depending on the subject, how else can they consider themselves other than centre ground? And the thing about centrism, it is quite abstract. I concede that, I admit that, and I'm happy with that. It's not as fixed as socialism or conservatism or libertarianism. It's quite a loose term because centrists will not agree with each other either. But I think it's convenient, and it's also applicable to someone who really does have sentiments that veer both left and right. That's not being confused. That's just being honest with yourself. If if you do veer to the right on a particular subject, that's fine. If you veer to the left on a particular subject, that's fine. But I think there's this notion that it's somehow contradictory. Oh, well, they must be woolly minded. They can't decide what they believe. Not at all. I'm very opinionated and I have very strong views. Um, but I just know that, I mean, put it this way, when both the hard right and the hard left aggravate me, that in itself is saying something. Because if I was such a partisan that I was on one side or the other, then I wouldn't feel that way. The very fact that I do feel contentions with both sides demonstrates that I'm somewhere in the middle. And this thing about being in the middle, it's not about wanting to please everyone. It's not about not having conviction. That's really not what it's about. It's about looking at your overall outlook, and that's where you gravitate to. Because there's people out there, and it's a totally legitimate position. I'm not knocking them. They're true to themselves, but they would be very left wing, and every position they have would be left wing. Or there's people who are very conservative, very right wing, and every position they have would be right wing. And I don't say that's illegitimate, that they're true to themselves, but why can't someone who then has sympathies with, areas on both sides not describe themselves as a centrist? It's strange that people seem to think you have to be either hard right or hard left. That's ridiculous. But I do think it's a challenging time because, I mean, let's just look at this country. I could extend this around the world, but that might muddy the waters a bit. Just looking at the UK, the speculation is that Reform is going to get into government next. It's not confirmed yet. It is just speculative at this point. But I think this country unquestionably has lurched to the right, which is ironic since a supposedly centre-left party came to power on a landslide last year. And I don't think it can just be explained by frustration with the Conservatives, because if that was the case, Reform would have come to power last year. Reform made gains, but they didn't come to power. The Liberal Democrats done well last year. So, although there has been a lurch to the right in this country, it's not a sort of universal statement. It's not like the left has been totally silenced and pushed into a corner. I think what's actually happened is both sides have got more hardline in a sense. So, for example, with the rise of Reform and all the anti-immigration rhetoric, the left then feel they have to respond to that. So they're going to notch up the rhetoric on, as they see it, calling out racism. And I've just come across, just as an example, an anti-Reform Facebook page. And I don't trust Reform, I don't like Reform, so I'd be tempted to follow it. But I was slightly put off by the fact that we're against racism and dog whistle politics, and a lot of the posts are about so-called Islamophobia. Now, I don't trust Reform, but I don't have this naive idea that there's no issue with Islamic extremism, because there is. So, in wanting to perhaps align myself with a group that opposes a party that I don't trust, I don't entirely trust them either, because they would veer a bit too hard to the left for my liking. It's one reason why I haven't endorsed Hope Not Hate. Hope Not Hate is right to call out the far right, and they are right to point out that that is a problem. But why do I not endorse them? Because they're not consistent. They call out the far right, but they're silent about Islamist extremism. Now, my centrist mind says actually both of those things are a problem. Shouldn't we be calling out both of those problems? Not long ago there was a group of guys arrested, part of a neo-Nazi cell. They were radicalising young people online. That's the sort of poison that we see from the far right, and it is a problem in this country. But I think the left for too long have been a little bit naive about pan-Islamism. They just assume that criticism of Islam must automatically be, as they would put it, Islamophobic. I really have a problem with that term. I think it is used to silence legitimate criticism of Islam in a way that some right-wing Jewish groups use anti-Semitism to silence criticism of Israel. unless someone is explicitly saying that they hate Muslims or they hate Jews and throwing out these tags on them, it's a little bit of an evasive argument. But sometimes you sort of think, well, where's the hope here? For me, people might think, well, Nathan, you're a centrist. The most logical parties are Liberal Democrats. And right now they are the party that I would probably gravitate most to. But I'm not totally satisfied with the Lib Dems, because one of the areas they do veer more to the right is on crime. The Liberal Democrats are a centre-left party. They would take left-wing attitudes to crime, and they always have. Not so much at a local level, they talk tough on a local level, and then they talk about more bobbies on the beats and all good stuff, but at a national level that the Tories raised a critique recently, and to be absolutely fair, it was probably a valid point. They say the Lib Dems present themselves as a centrist party, but they're actually a left-wing party. That isn't without basis. There is some truth in that. The Lib Dems are definitely more to the left than the centre, and yet I wouldn't say that as left-wing as, say, the Greens or the SNP. So quite honestly, and why not Labour? Well, I am deeply frustrated by some of the positions Labour's taken. The China thing for me is no small thing. That is a major issue. And I don't think the government has given a satisfactory response to that. The welfare thing, I do not like the way that Labour ministers are trying to out-Tory the Tories on that. Talking about taking away money from disabled claimants. All the rhetoric, it's indistinguishable from the Conservatives. I just think this should be a support mechanism for people who need it. But it shouldn't be about stigmatising people. And too many Labour ministers act like their Tory counterparts. They keep talking about the need to help working people and, talk about scrutinising benefits fraudsters and all the rest of it. Benefit fraud's a problem, but most people who sign on are not fraudsters. And, anyone who thinks that claimants just get something for nothing, at least on the universal credit side of things, it's not that way at all. There is a strict sanction culture in place. So I don't like the way Labour's handled that at all. But I mean, all the parties right now, I've got contentions with all of them. It's just that the Liberal Democrats are the party I have the least contentions with. Maybe there's a tiny little bit of nostalgia on my part because I was a member of the Liberal Democrats for 5 years, from 2005 to 2010 or 11. I can't remember when I cancelled my membership. And I stood as a candidate twice at council level unsuccessfully because Sunderland was a strong Labour seat at the time. At the moment, the Labour council here is being threatened by reform. Sunderland is still a Labour city, but I wouldn't be too surprised if reform takes over at some point, and that to me is very concerning. I don't trust reform. I mean, if they can't handle county council, how can they run the country? But I just wonder, does anyone else out there feel this way, whereby you feel a little bit disillusioned with politics in the sense that, I don't want to be, in the sense that you find it hard to align to any one party. I don't want to be too negative because I'm not, I think it's a bit of a lazy argument to say, oh, they're all the same, all politicians are the same. I don't think that's a fair argument. I mean, my local MP, Lewis Atkinson, Labour MP, I spoke to the guy a few times. I honestly think he's a decent MP. I think he's a decent man. I think he's a decent MP. I may disagree with some of the positions his party takes, but I could tell he works hard for his constituents. He's doing different things every day. This is not a Labour Party pitch. I'm just being fair. And I know Liberal Democrats here, also decent people. So that actually taps into a point which I want to observe about party politics. Often parties are driven by the direction of the leader or the general direction they take. I would honestly say probably most political parties have decent people who are in it for the right reasons. Even Reform, I will say that. I do not believe that everyone who is an activist or member of the Reform Party is some sort of reactionary racist. I really, really don't believe that. I do think that there will be racists attracted to Reform, absolutely. But I don't think that that's the case, and I think they're therefore be making a mistake to just vilify the entire party as this racist far right entity. I think that's overly simplistic. They're definitely hard right, no question about that. They are. By definition, when you look at their policies, they are a hard right party. And some of their policies are utterly contemptible and immoral. For example, putting anxiety and pressure on people who are legally here. I just don't see any moral justification for that. People who have been cleared by the Home Office. It's like that Conservative MP that I was disgusted by her. But you expect it from Reform. But I'm open-minded enough to say, well, there will be people in Reform who are genuinely concerned about the levels of immigration and also about the pan-Islamist threat, etc. And they may see Reform as being the only party that's really discussing those things. So I try to be open-minded enough to see why people would vote for parties. But I am not going to apologise for considering myself a centrist and for observing that we are in a time where there's strong partisan rancour. And the difficulty with aligning yourself with any party is you're then expected to defend all their positions. Being independent, and by that I mean deliberately not associating yourself with a specific political party, gives you certain leeway, because then you can endorse and criticise without necessarily being accused of bias. Or you might still be accused of bias, but at least you could say, well, I've no partisan agenda because I'm not a member of that party. I think for people who are political and politically active, being a member of a party makes sense. But, if like me, you do feel a bit disillusioned, it may be that there's more people out there who actually have pretty moderate opinions, and it may simply be that the most dogmatic people are just the loudest. So I often say, when we see comments on social media and they look like they're really hyper partisan, they may simply just be more vocal. It doesn't necessarily represent the whole picture. I often see on X and other sites things saying that all British people hate Starmer. Well, no, they don't. He's not a popular Prime Minister, but that sort of arrogant positioning of I speak for everyone. No, you don't. I would never be so arrogant as to say that any of my viewpoints speaks for everyone. Some of them may be the majority. I would say, for instance, that most people favour a more hardline approach on crime, but I know it's not everyone, and it isn't even every victim of crime. There's some victims of crime who would still, even despite their own experience, still favour a more liberal approach to that. I don't, but that's my position. Anyway, in conclusion, I think it's very important that we stick to our own conviction, but sticking to our own conviction doesn't mean being so dogmatic that we're never open to considering other points of view or to changing our own position. I think we need to get away from the ego, this idea that if you change your position, it's somehow a loss of face or you've shown weakness. Changing one's position isn't a bad thing if you've got more information, and I wouldn't even judge politicians too harshly for changing their position if they give a valid reason for doing so, i.e. More developments have happened, they're looking at things in a different way. I think it's a little bit unreasonable to say if a politician at some point in their political career changes their view, then they lack conviction. It may simply be they have looked at things with a different perspective. And why isn't that valid? I do think if an MP changes party, there should be an automatic by-election, for sure. Because if you vote for, say, a Conservative MP and they join Reform, or a Labour MP and they join the Greens, then the people have a right to say, well, I didn't vote for a Green MP, I didn't vote for a Reform MP. So I do think there should be an automatic by-election when an MP defects to another party. Anyway, I'm going to wrap this up. I do find it can be a little challenging because you find that, with me, I run this channel, I put forward my thoughts, and I'm always true to what I say. I always stand by my conviction. But I do understand actually why people would look at a video I'm making where I'm hardline on crime, and then another video where I'm attacking the far right, and they may be a bit confused, and maybe people feel disappointed. For instance, they'll look at a video I'm making where I'm hardline on crime, and they may think, oh, well, this guy's a right winger and I'm a right winger, and he's also going to be really hardline on immigration. Whereas on the immigration issue, I take a more sort of middle ground approach. I think there's some people definitely shouldn't be here, but I definitely don't believe in pulling up the drawbridge and the overt negativity we hear around the subject constantly. So that's it. I'm a centrist, and some of my views are on the left, some of my views are on the right. I will never um, back down from being true to myself. That's it.